My name is Elizabeth Morgan, and I need to tell you about the moment my entire world came crashing down around me. I was 42 years old, living what I thought was my dream life in a beautiful colonial home in Connecticut with my husband David, who worked as an investment advisor in one of those gleaming glass towers in Manhattan. For 15 years, I had believed in our love story with the kind of faith that only comes from never having reason to doubt. David had this way of making me feel like I was the only woman in the world when he looked at me, with those deep brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Every morning, without fail, he would bring me coffee in bed, exactly the way I liked it, with just a splash of cream and half a teaspoon of sugar, and he would sit on the edge of our bed while I took those first precious sips, asking me about my plans for the day and really listening to my answers. I was a successful businesswoman in my own right, having built a thriving consulting firm from the ground up over the past 2 decades. My company specialized in helping other businesses streamline their operations, and through years of hard work, smart investments, and a little bit of luck, I had accumulated a personal net worth of around $450 million. But money had never been what our relationship was about, or at least that's what I believed. David and I had met at a charity gala when we were both in our late 20s, both ambitious, both driven, but also both looking for someone who could understand the demands of building a career while still wanting to build a life together. He had approached me during the cocktail hour, making some witty comment about the overcooked salmon being served, and we had spent the entire evening talking, forgetting about everyone else in that crowded ballroom. Our wedding had been a small affair, just family and close friends at a vineyard in Napa Valley. I remember standing there in my simple silk dress, looking at David as he said his vows, thinking that I had found my person, my partner, my forever. We had built our life together piece by piece, buying our first tiny apartment in Brooklyn, then upgrading to a larger place when my business started taking off, and finally settling into our dream home in Connecticut 5 years ago. We had talked about children but decided to wait, always thinking there would be time later, always believing we had all the time in the world. David supported my career ambitions without question, or so I thought, celebrating my victories as if they were his own, consoling me through my failures with gentle words and strong arms around me. But that night, that terrible night when everything changed, it was a Thursday in late October. The leaves outside were at their peak autumn colors, and I had spent the day in back-to-back meetings, finally getting home around 9 in the evening. David had texted that he would be working late, which wasn't unusual, so I had eaten a light dinner alone, taken a long hot bath, and gone to bed with a book. I must have dozed off because I woke suddenly to find the bed empty beside me. The digital clock on the nightstand read 12:47 a.m. At first I wasn't concerned. David often worked late and sometimes couldn't sleep afterward, so he would go downstairs to avoid waking me. But something felt different this time. Maybe it was the tone of his voice carrying up through the floorboards, low and intense in a way I had never heard before. I lay there for a moment, trying to shake off the fog of sleep, telling myself I was being paranoid. But then I heard him say something that made my blood run cold. "She has no idea what's coming," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet house. "I've been patient, playing the long game, and it's finally about to pay off." My heart started hammering in my chest so hard I was sure he would somehow hear it from downstairs. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, my bare feet silent on the plush carpet. Our house had been built in the 1920s, and despite all our renovations, the floors still creaked in certain spots. So I had to be careful as I made my way to the top of the stairs. David's home office was just off the main hallway on the first floor, and I could see the light spilling out from under the closed door. I descended the stairs one careful step at a time, holding my breath, straining to hear more of his conversation. "The lawyer says another month, maybe 6 weeks at most," he was saying. "I've got everything documented, all the ammunition I need. She won't know what hit her." I pressed myself against the wall beside his office door, my whole body trembling. No, I've been very careful," he continued. "Small transfers, nothing that would raise red flags. She trusts me completely with the finances." There was a pause, then a laugh that sounded nothing like the man I had married. 450 million? Try to imagine what half of that could do. Hell, even if I only get 40% in the settlement, we're set for life. The "we" in that sentence hit me like a physical blow. There was someone else. Of course there was someone else. How stupid had I been? I stayed there, frozen against the wall, for what felt like hours but was probably only a few more minutes, listening as my husband discussed the dismantling of our life like it was a hostile corporate takeover. He talked about hidden accounts, about documentation he had been falsifying, about making me look unstable and unfit. The therapy sessions were genius, he said at one point, getting her to go to couples counseling and then twisting everything she said. My lawyer says it's gold. I remembered those sessions, how David had suggested them 6 months ago, saying he wanted to make sure we stayed strong. I had been touched by his commitment to our marriage. What a fool I had been. When I finally heard him wrapping up the call, I forced myself to move, creeping back up the stairs as quickly and quietly as I could. I slipped back into bed and lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to control my breathing as I heard his footsteps on the stairs, in the hallway, approaching our bedroom door. He slid into bed beside me with practiced ease, and I had to fight not to flinch when he draped his arm over me, pulling me close like he did every night. "Love you," he murmured sleepily, pressing a kiss to my shoulder. I kept my breathing deep and even, feigning sleep while inside I was screaming. The next morning was perhaps the hardest performance of my life. I woke up at my usual time, smiled at David as he brought me my coffee, chatted about my day ahead like nothing had changed. He was going to New York for meetings, he said, and might be late again. "Don't wait up," he said, kissing me goodbye at the door. "You work too hard. You need your rest." The concern in his voice sounded so genuine that for a moment I almost doubted what I had heard the night before. But then I saw something flicker in his eyes, just for a second, and I knew it had all been real. As soon as his car disappeared down our tree-lined drive, I called my assistant and told her to cancel all my meetings for the day. Then I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, trying to figure out what to do next. My first instinct was to call my sister Sarah, but I stopped myself. What would I say? That I had overheard my husband planning to divorce me and take half my money? It sounded like something out of a bad movie. Instead, I did something I had never done before in 15 years of marriage. I logged into our joint bank accounts. David had always handled our day-to-day finances, and I had been grateful for it, too busy with my company to worry about paying bills or managing investments. I had my own business accounts, of course, but our personal finances had been his domain. What I saw made me physically ill. Over the past 6 months, there had been dozens of transfers, small amounts but consistent, moving money out of our joint accounts. 5,000 here, 7,000 there, amounts small enough not to trigger any automatic alerts, but adding up to nearly $200,000. But it wasn't just the money that made me feel sick. It was the betrayal of trust. Every single transfer had been made on days when I was traveling for business, when I was distracted and unavailable. He had been planning this for months, maybe longer, and I had been blissfully unaware, talking about vacation plans and retirement dreams while he was systematically preparing to destroy me. I spent the rest of that morning going through everything I could access, taking screenshots, documenting what I found. My hands shook as I worked, and I had to stop several times to cry, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep inside me. But each time, I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and kept going. Because I was starting to understand something important. David thought he knew me, thought he had me figured out. He saw me as a workaholic who had neglected her marriage, who trusted him blindly, who would be caught completely off guard. And he was right about one thing: I had trusted him blindly. But he was wrong about everything else. That afternoon, I did something I probably should have done the moment I heard that phone call. I called Rebecca Sterling. Rebecca wasn't just any attorney. She was one of the best divorce lawyers on the East Coast. And more importantly, she was someone I had known since we were both struggling young professionals, trying to make it in a male-dominated world. We had lost touch over the years, busy with our respective careers, but I knew she would remember me. When her assistant put me through, Rebecca's voice was warm but immediately concerned. "Elizabeth, it's been too long. What's going on?" I took a deep breath. "I need your help, Rebecca. My husband is planning to divorce me, and he's been moving money. A lot of money." There was a pause. Then Rebecca's voice changed, becoming the sharp, professional tone I remembered from when we used to prep for presentations together. "How much are we talking about?" I told her about my net worth, about what I had discovered that morning, about the phone call I had overheard. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds that let me know she was taking it all in. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can you come to my office right now? And Elizabeth, don't say anything to him. Not a word. Let him think everything is normal." I assured her I would, and within an hour, I was sitting in her corner office in Stamford, watching the autumn sun slant through the windows as she laid out my options. "The first thing we need to do," Rebecca said, her fingers steepled in front of her, "is protect your assets, every penny. He's been planning this for months, which means he's probably got more documentation than just those transfers. We need to move fast." She explained about trusts and asset protection, about how Connecticut law worked, about what David could and couldn't claim. The fact that you built your business before the marriage works in your favor, she said. But we need to be smart about this. He's clearly been getting advice, bad advice, if he thinks those transfers won't be discovered, but advice nonetheless. We spent the next 3 hours going through everything, planning our strategy. Rebecca brought in her team, financial experts and investigators who specialized in high net worth divorces. By the time I left her office, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that seemed too beautiful for such an ugly day. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity, all conducted in secret while I continued to play the role of the unsuspecting wife. Every morning, David brought me coffee and I smiled and thanked him. Every evening, we ate dinner together and talked about our days, and I responded as if I didn't know he was lying with every word. It was exhausting, this performance, but it was necessary. Rebecca and her team were working around the clock to protect my assets, setting up trusts, moving investments, ensuring that everything I had worked for couldn't be touched. He's going to be furious when he finds out, Rebecca warned me during one of our daily check-ins. Men like David don't like it when their plans fall apart. I thought about the man I had married, the one who had danced with me at our wedding, who had held my hand through my father's funeral, who had celebrated with champagne when I landed my first $1 million client. Where had that man gone? Or had he ever existed at all? On the 5th day, a Friday, Rebecca called with news that made my blood run cold. "We've discovered something," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Your husband has been working with someone, a man named Marcus Tillman. Ring any bells?" The name meant nothing to me, and I told her so. "He's trouble," she continued. "He's been involved in several cases like this, helping spouses hide assets, create false paper trails. He's very good at making the innocent party look guilty." I sank into my office chair, feeling the weight of what I was up against. This wasn't just about David wanting out of our marriage or even wanting my money. This was a calculated attack designed to destroy me. "What do we do?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Rebecca's response was fierce. "We fight. And Elizabeth, we're going to win." That weekend, David announced he had to go to Boston for business. "Big potential client," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I might be gone until Tuesday." I helped him pack, folding his shirts the way he liked them, reminding him to take his phone charger. Inside, I was counting down the hours until he left, until I could drop this exhausting pretense for just a little while. As his car pulled away on Saturday morning, I stood at our front door, waving goodbye like a dutiful wife, and the moment he was out of sight, I called Rebecca. "He's gone," I said. "Let's move." What followed were the most intense 48 hours of my life. Rebecca's team descended on my house with boxes of documents and laptops. We went through everything: 15 years of financial records, investments, property deeds, business contracts. Everything that was mine, everything I had built, was cataloged and protected. By Sunday evening, it was done. My $450 million fortune was safely tucked away in a complex series of trusts that would take an army of lawyers years to unravel. The house, which was in both our names but purchased entirely with my money, had been transferred to one of the trusts. My business assets were protected by ironclad agreements that predated our marriage. David could file for divorce tomorrow, and the most he would walk away with would be the clothes on his back and whatever was in his personal accounts. "He's going to come at you hard when he realizes what you've done," Rebecca warned as her team packed up to leave. "This kind of man doesn't like to lose, especially to a woman. Be prepared for anything." I nodded, feeling strangely calm. The worst had already happened. My husband, the man I loved, had betrayed me. Whatever came next couldn't possibly hurt more than that. David came home Tuesday evening, full of stories about his supposed business trip. I listened and nodded and asked appropriate questions, all while knowing that Rebecca's investigator had followed him to Boston, where he had spent the weekend not with clients, but with a woman named Stephanie Chen, a financial analyst 20 years his junior. They had stayed at the Four Seasons, had champagne delivered to their room, had been photographed laughing over dinner at a restaurant where David had taken me for our anniversary just 3 months earlier. The investigator had been thorough, and the pictures were crystal clear. But I didn't feel the rage I expected. Instead, I felt a strange sort of pity. David was so confident in his plan, so sure he had me fooled, that he wasn't even being careful. His arrogance would be his downfall. The following Monday, exactly 2 weeks after I'd overheard that phone call, David made his move. He came home from work with a solemn expression, carrying a manila envelope. "Elizabeth, we need to talk," he said, gesturing for me to join him in the living room. I sat across from him, my hands folded in my lap, and waited. He gave a great sigh, as if what he was about to do pained him greatly. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he began, "about us, about our marriage. And I've come to realize that we've grown apart. We're not the same people we were 15 years ago." I stayed silent, watching his performance with a sort of detached fascination. This was the speech he had prepared, the one designed to make me feel guilty, to make me think our failed marriage was my fault. He went on for several minutes, talking about how my work consumed me, how we never spent quality time together anymore, how he felt neglected and unappreciated. "I think," he finally said, sliding the envelope across the coffee table toward me, "that it would be best for both of us if we separated. I've had papers drawn up. It's all very fair, very straightforward. We'll split everything down the middle, and we can both move on with our lives." I picked up the envelope but didn't open it. "I see," I said quietly. His eyes narrowed slightly, perhaps surprised by my calm response. "I know this is a shock," he said, leaning forward with false concern. "Take some time to process, look over the papers. We can talk more tomorrow." I stood up, still holding the envelope. "Actually, David, I don't think we need to wait until tomorrow." His face went very still. "What do you mean?" I set the envelope down on the coffee table, unopened. "I mean that I know about Stephanie. I know about the money you've been moving. I know about Marcus Tillman and whatever scheme you've been cooking up to make me look like I've been embezzling or hiding assets or whatever story you've fabricated." The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice cracked on the words. "Really?" I pulled out my phone, scrolled to one of the photos from Boston, and showed it to him. "This doesn't ring any bells? How about this?" I switched to a screenshot of one of his bank transfers. Or this. A photo of him entering Marcus Tillman's office building, taken by Rebecca's investigator just 3 days ago. David stood abruptly, his face flushing red. "You've been spying on me?" The outrage in his voice might have been funny if it hadn't been so pathetic. "That's your response?" I asked. "You've been planning to destroy me for months, and you're upset that I found out?" He started to pace, running his hands through his hair. "You don't understand," he said. "It's not what you think. I never wanted to hurt you." I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised us both. "No, you just wanted to steal half of everything I've worked for. That's so much better." His pacing stopped, and he turned to face me, his expression shifting from panicked to calculating. "You can't prove anything," he said. "Those transfers were for investments, for our future. And Stephanie, that's nothing. A business relationship." I shook my head, almost pitying him. "David, I have everything. Every transfer, every meeting, every hotel receipt. More importantly, I have the phone call. Did you know that Connecticut is a one-party consent state for recording? My home security system captured your entire conversation that night." It was a lie. I hadn't recorded anything. But he didn't know that. The look of panic that crossed his face was almost worth the past 2 weeks of agony. "You recorded me? In my own home?" I stepped closer to him, drawing strength from the fear in his eyes. "My home, actually. See, that's something else you should know. While you were in Boston with your girlfriend, I was busy protecting what's mine. Every penny, every investment, every property, it's all in trust now, legally protected. You can file those divorce papers if you want, but you won't get a dime." He sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. For a moment, he looked like the man I had fallen in love with all those years ago, vulnerable and lost. But I couldn't afford to feel sympathy, not anymore. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice muffled by his hands. "I'll fight this. You can't just cut me off with nothing. I have rights." I picked up the envelope containing his divorce papers and dropped it in his lap. "You're right," I said. "You do have rights. You have the right to leave my house tonight and not come back. You have the right to have your lawyer contact my lawyer. And you have the right to explain to a judge why you've been stealing from our joint accounts and planning to frame me for financial crimes." His head snapped up. "Frame you? I never—" But he couldn't finish the lie, not when we both knew the truth. "There's a hotel down by the highway," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I suggest you go there tonight. Rebecca Sterling will be in touch with your lawyer tomorrow to discuss the terms of our divorce." He stood slowly like an old man, all his confidence and arrogance stripped away. "Elizabeth," he started, but I held up my hand. "No, you don't get to Elizabeth me. You made your choice, David. Now live with it." I watched him pack a bag, standing in the doorway of our bedroom to make sure he only took what was his. He moved mechanically, folding clothes and gathering toiletries like a robot going through the motions. When he was done, he stood at our front door, suitcase in hand, and looked at me one last time. "I did love you once," he said quietly, "in the beginning." I met his gaze steadily. "I know," I said. "That's what makes this so much worse." And then he was gone, walking out into the October night, leaving me alone in the house we had shared for 5 years. I locked the door behind him, set the alarm, and then sat on my kitchen floor and cried until I had no tears left. The next phase of this battle began immediately. True to his word, David didn't go quietly. Within days, his lawyer, a shark named Bradley Thornton, who was known for taking on high-profile, high-net-worth divorces, filed a barrage of motions. David was claiming that I had illegally hidden marital assets, that I had been planning to leave him for months and had systematically moved money to defraud him. It was almost laughable, him accusing me of exactly what he had been doing. Rebecca was ready for it. "This is standard tactics," she told me during one of our strategy sessions. "Accuse the other party of what you're guilty of, muddy the waters, hope something sticks." But David and his team weren't content with just legal maneuvering. They went for my reputation. A week after he moved out, I started getting calls from colleagues asking if everything was okay. Apparently, rumors were circulating in our professional community that I was under investigation for financial improprieties at my company. The rumors were vague but damaging, suggesting that I had been using company funds for personal expenses, that there were irregularities in our books. I knew immediately where they were coming from. "He's trying to force your hand," Rebecca explained when I called her in a panic. "If he can damage your professional reputation, he thinks you'll settle quickly to make it all go away." But Rebecca had anticipated this too. She had already engaged a crisis management firm that specialized in protecting executives during messy divorces. Within hours, they had traced the rumors back to their source, an anonymous blog post that had been picked up and shared in certain business circles. The IP address led back to Marcus Tillman's office. "This is good," Rebecca said when she called with the news. "He's getting sloppy, leaving digital footprints. We can use this." She filed a cease and desist order and began preparing a defamation suit. Meanwhile, I had to face the whispers and sideways glances at industry events, had to hold my head high while knowing that people were gossiping about me behind my back. But I had built my company on a foundation of integrity and transparency, and my clients knew me. One by one, they called or emailed to express their support, to tell me they didn't believe the rumors. My CFO, Janet, who had been with me for 10 years, was particularly incensed. "I've gone over our books with a microscope," she told me. "Everything is perfect, as always. If anyone asks, I'll tell them exactly that." The loyalty of my team gave me strength during those difficult weeks. Then David made a crucial mistake. In his eagerness to paint me as the villain, he overplayed his hand. Rebecca's investigator discovered that Marcus Tillman had created false financial documents, purporting to show that I had been embezzling from my company. They were sophisticated forgeries, good enough to fool a casual observer, but they had one fatal flaw. They referenced transactions that had supposedly occurred while I was documented as being out of the country on business. "He didn't do his homework," Rebecca said with grim satisfaction. "We have your passport stamps, your flight records, hotel receipts. You couldn't have made these transactions because you weren't even in the country." We filed our own suit, not just for defamation, but for fraud, conspiracy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The dollar amount we were seeking was astronomical, enough to make even Bradley Thornton take notice. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. There were depositions where I had to sit across from David and answer questions about our marriage, our finances, our life together. He could barely look at me during these sessions, which was fine because I had no desire to look at him either. The man sitting across the conference table, with his expensive suit and coached responses, was a stranger to me. Rebecca systematically dismantled their case piece by piece. She produced evidence of David's affair with Stephanie, showed the pattern of his financial transfers, exposed his relationship with Marcus Tillman. She brought in forensic accountants who traced every penny and showed that not only had I not hidden assets, but that David had been stealing from our joint accounts for over a year. The turning point came when Marcus Tillman, facing his own legal troubles, decided to cooperate with authorities. Apparently, this wasn't his first rodeo, and the FBI had been building a case against him for years. Faced with serious jail time, he flipped on David, admitting to creating the false documents and revealing the full extent of their plan. According to Tillman, David had been planning this for over 2 years. Long before I had any idea our marriage was in trouble, He had been slowly documenting supposed evidence of my neglect and emotional absence, twisting normal business trips and long work hours into abandonment. He had been recording our conversations, hoping to catch me saying something that could be used against me. The therapy sessions had been his idea, not to save our marriage, but to create a paper trail of our problems. Problems he had largely invented or exacerbated. Learning the full extent of his deception was like being betrayed all over again. This wasn't a man who had fallen out of love and handled it badly. This was a man who had seen me as a mark, a target, a means to an end. Rebecca had to physically restrain me from confronting him when we got Tillman's full statement. "Let the system handle him," she said. "Trust me, it will be so much worse than anything you could do." She was right. With Tillman's cooperation and the mountain of evidence we had assembled, David's case completely fell apart. Bradley Thornton, seeing the writing on the wall, tried to negotiate a settlement, but Rebecca wasn't interested in negotiating. "He started this war," she said. "We're going to finish it." The final hearing was on a cold February morning, almost 4 months after that night I overheard David's phone call. I dressed carefully that day, choosing a black suit that made me feel powerful and a pair of shoes that had always brought me luck. Rebecca and I arrived early, setting up our materials in the courtroom with practiced efficiency. David arrived just before the hearing was scheduled to begin, looking haggard and older than his 45 years. The proceedings were almost anticlimactic after all the drama that had preceded them. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Hendricks, reviewed the evidence with careful attention. She asked pointed questions about the false documents, about the financial transfers, about the conspiracy to damage my reputation. David's lawyer tried to spin it, tried to make it seem like a misunderstanding, but Judge Hendricks wasn't buying it. When she delivered her ruling, her voice was sharp with disapproval. Not only was David denied any claim to my assets, but he was ordered to pay significant damages for defamation and fraud. The amount wasn't anywhere near what we had asked for, but it was enough to send a message. More importantly, the ruling was structured in a way that made it clear that David's actions had been malicious and calculating. It would follow him for the rest of his life, a public record of his deception and greed. As we left the courthouse, David tried to approach me one last time. "Elizabeth, please," he said, reaching out as if to touch my arm. I stepped back, out of reach. "I have nothing to say to you," I told him. "Not now, not ever." Rebecca moved between us, her expression making it clear that he needed to back off. He stood there on the courthouse steps, watching as we walked away, and that was the last time I saw him. In the weeks and months that followed, I slowly began to rebuild my life. The house felt different without David in it, emptier but also cleaner somehow, as if his deception had been a physical presence that was finally gone. I redecorated, painting the walls in colors he had never liked, buying furniture that was entirely my taste. I threw myself back into my work, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of running my company. My team had stood by me throughout the ordeal, and together we reached new heights, landing contracts I had only dreamed of before. The rumors David had tried to spread had backfired spectacularly. Once the truth came out, I found that my reputation was actually enhanced. I had become known as someone who couldn't be bullied or broken, someone who protected what was theirs. It wasn't the reputation I would have chosen, but it served me well in the business world. I also found myself reconnecting with friends I had lost touch with during my marriage. I hadn't realized how isolated I had become, how much of my social life had revolved around David and his preferences. Now I was free to accept invitations he would have turned down, to pursue friendships he had found boring. My sister Sarah, who had been worried sick throughout the divorce proceedings, became a regular fixture in my life again. We had weekly dinners where we could talk about anything except my ex-husband, a rule she had instituted to help me move forward. Slowly, I began to remember who I had been before David, and to discover who I could be without him. The financial impact of protecting my assets had been significant, but worthwhile. Yes, the legal fees had been astronomical, and yes, the trust structures Rebecca had set up were complex and sometimes cumbersome. But I had protected the fruit of 20 years of hard work, and that was priceless. I made some changes to how I manage my finances going forward. Never again would I be so trusting, so willing to hand over control to someone else. I hired a personal financial advisor, someone Rebecca recommended, and I made it a point to review every statement, every transaction, every investment. It wasn't that I didn't trust anyone. I had learned to trust but verify, to protect myself while still being open to life. Dating was the last frontier, and one I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Friends tried to set me up. Colleagues hinted about eligible men they knew, but I wasn't interested. The wound David had left was still too fresh. The betrayal too deep. How could I trust someone new when the person who had promised to love and cherish me had been planning my downfall? My therapist, a wonderful woman named Dr. Patricia Kim, helped me work through these feelings. What David did to you was abuse, she said during one session. Financial abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse. It's going to take time to heal from that. Be patient with yourself. So I was patient. I focused on my work, my friendships, my family. I learned to be alone without being lonely, to enjoy my own company, to find joy in small things that had nothing to do with romantic relationships. About a year after the divorce was finalized, I heard through the grapevine that David's life had taken a dramatic downturn. His relationship with Stephanie had ended badly when she realized he wasn't the wealthy financier he had pretended to be. His reputation in financial circles was ruined, both by the public divorce proceedings and by word of mouth about his deception. He had lost his job at the investment firm and was struggling to find new employment. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction at hearing this, but mostly I felt nothing. He had become irrelevant to my life, a cautionary tale about the dangers of trust, nothing more. The opposite was true for Marcus Tillman, who had been sentenced to prison for his role not just in our case, but in several others. His testimony had helped put away 3 other people who had been running similar schemes. In a strange way, I was grateful to him. If he hadn't been so greedy, if he hadn't left such clear evidence of his crimes, David might have gotten away with his plan. Rebecca and I remained friends after everything was settled. She had gone above and beyond during my case, and I knew I owed her more than just legal fees. We met for lunch once a month, sometimes talking about business, sometimes just enjoying each other's company. You know, she told me one day, about 18 months after the divorce, I've handled a lot of cases like yours, but I've never seen anyone handle it with as much grace and strength as you did. I shook my head. I didn't feel graceful or strong. Most of the time, I felt like I was barely holding it together. She smiled. That's what strength looks like. Doing what needs to be done, even when you're falling apart inside. Her words stayed with me, a reminder that I had survived something that could have destroyed me. 2 years after that terrible night when I overheard David's phone call, I found myself in a place I never expected to be happy. Not the giddy, unrealistic happiness of my early marriage, but something deeper and more sustainable. I was successful in my career, surrounded by friends and family who genuinely cared about me, financially secure and in control of my own destiny. The trust I had lost had been replaced by something better, by self-reliance tempered with wisdom. I had learned to read people more carefully, to pay attention to actions rather than words, to protect myself without closing myself off entirely. These were painful lessons, but valuable ones. I still lived in the same house, but it no longer held any ghosts. Every room had been reclaimed, every memory overwritten with new ones. My home office, which had once been David's domain, was now my favorite room, filled with books and awards and photographs of trips I had taken solo or with friends. The kitchen where I had discovered his betrayal was now where I hosted dinner parties for my inner circle, filling the space with laughter and good food and genuine connection. Even our old bedroom had been transformed, the bed replaced, the furniture rearranged, the walls painted a soft blue that David would have hated, but that made me feel peaceful. It was my sanctuary now, not ours, and that made all the difference. Looking back on everything that happened, I sometimes wondered if there had been signs I had missed, red flags I had ignored in my trust and contentment. Maybe there had been. Maybe if I had been less focused on my career, more attentive to the small details of our daily life, I would have noticed David's growing resentment or his secret planning. But I had come to realize that this kind of thinking was both useless and harmful. The only person responsible for David's actions was David. I had been a good wife, supportive and loving and trusting. The fact that he had taken advantage of that trust said everything about him and nothing about me. This was a lesson I tried to share with other women who reached out to me after hearing my story. Women who were facing their own betrayals and wondering what they had done wrong. You didn't do anything wrong, I would tell them. Trusting your partner isn't a character flaw. Just make sure you protect yourself going forward. The business world had taught me many things, but perhaps the most important lesson was that success was the best revenge. Not revenge in the sense of trying to hurt David or make him jealous. I genuinely didn't care what he thought anymore. But revenge against the narrative he had tried to create, the image of me as a cold, neglectful wife who deserved to lose everything. My continued success, my resilience, my refusal to be broken by his betrayal, all of these things were a form of victory. Every new contract my company won, Every milestone we reached, every award we received was proof that David had been wrong about me. I wasn't just a bank account to be plundered or a problem to be solved. I was a force to be reckoned with, and I had proved it. The question I got asked most often, usually by well-meaning friends or curious acquaintances, was whether I would ever trust again, ever open myself up to the possibility of love. For a long time, my answer was a firm no. The risk seemed too great, the potential for pain too overwhelming. But as time passed and the wounds began to heal, I found my position softening. I wasn't actively looking for love, wasn't interested in dating apps or setups or any of the modern ways people seem to find each other. But I was no longer closed to the possibility. If someone came along who proved themselves worthy of trust, who showed through consistent actions that they valued me for more than my bank account, then maybe I could open my heart again. Maybe. The difference was that now I would go into any relationship with my eyes wide open, with legal protections in place, with the knowledge that love and trust were not the same as blind faith. I had also learned the importance of female friendship during this journey. The women who had stood by me, Rebecca with her fierce legal protection, Janet with her professional loyalty, Sarah with her sisterly devotion, Dr. Kim with her therapeutic guidance, these relationships had sustained me in ways I hadn't expected. There was something powerful about women supporting women, about the network of strength we could create when we stood together. I made it a point to pay that forward, mentoring young women in business, supporting female entrepreneurs, creating opportunities for others to succeed. If my story could help even one woman protect herself and her assets, then something good would have come from all that pain. As I approached my 45th birthday, 3 years after my divorce, I decided to mark the occasion with something special. Not a party. I had never been one for big celebrations, but a trip. I had always wanted to see the Northern Lights, had talked about it with David for years, but he had always found excuses to postpone. Too cold, too expensive, too far from civilization. Now I booked the trip for myself, a week in Iceland in a glass igloo where I could watch the aurora borealis from my bed. It felt symbolic somehow, pursuing a dream that had been deferred for someone else's preferences. The night I saw the lights for the first time, dancing across the Arctic sky in waves of green and purple and gold, I cried. Not from sadness, but from the sheer beauty of it, from the realization that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The trip to Iceland marked a turning point for me. When I returned home, I felt different, lighter somehow, as if I had left some invisible burden behind in the snow. I threw myself into new projects with renewed energy, expanding my company into international markets, taking on challenges that would have seemed impossible during my marriage when I was always holding back, always considering how my success might affect David's ego. Now there were no limits except the ones I placed on myself, and I was done with limits. We opened offices in London and Singapore, hired brilliant people from around the world, created something bigger and better than I had ever imagined possible. The financial press started calling me a force of nature, and while the description made me laugh, I didn't disagree. I had been forged in fire, and I had emerged stronger than before. One unexpected consequence of my story becoming known in business circles was the number of calls I received from other women going through similar situations. Executives, entrepreneurs, professionals who had built successful careers only to find themselves facing partners who saw their success as a target. I couldn't take every call or meet with everyone who reached out, but I tried to help where I could, sharing Rebecca's contact information, recommending financial advisors who specialized in protecting women's assets, sometimes just listening to their stories and assuring them they weren't alone. It became an unofficial part of my mission, this network of support for women who were fighting to protect what they had earned. We called ourselves the Phoenix Club, a tongue-in-cheek reference to rising from the ashes, and we met quarterly to share resources and support each other. What had started as my personal nightmare had transformed into a source of strength for dozens of women. The irony of David's betrayal was that it had made me more successful, not less. The skills I had developed during the divorce, hypervigilance about financial details, strategic thinking about protection and risk, the ability to see through deception had all translated into business advantages. I became known for my due diligence, for my ability to spot potential problems in deals that others missed. My company's reputation for integrity and transparency, which David had tried to destroy, became our strongest selling point. Clients knew that if they worked with us, they were working with people who valued honesty above all else, who had been tested by fire and had not compromised their principles. In trying to destroy me, David had inadvertently created a better, stronger version of myself. I'm sure the irony would have killed him if he had been aware enough to recognize it. As time passed, the acute pain of betrayal faded into something more manageable, a dull ache that only flared up occasionally, usually triggered by unexpected reminders. A song we had danced to at our wedding playing in a restaurant, the smell of his cologne on a stranger in an elevator, a couple holding hands in the park the way we used to. But these moments became less frequent and less powerful as the years went by. I was building new memories, creating new associations, overwriting the old programming with better, healthier patterns. Dr. Kim called it rewiring my neural pathways. I called it learning to live again. Whatever the term, it was working. I could think about my marriage now without the crushing weight of grief and anger. It had happened, it had been real. Parts of it had even been good, and now it was over. That was all. 5 years after the divorce, I received an unexpected message through my lawyer. David wanted to communicate with me, to apologize, to try to make amends. Rebecca called me personally to deliver this news, her voice carefully neutral. "You're under no obligation to respond," she said. "In fact, I'd advise against it, but I'm legally required to inform you of the request." I thought about it for all of 30 seconds before declining. I had no interest in David's apologies or explanations. Whatever he needed to say to clear his conscience, he could say it to a therapist or a priest or his bathroom mirror. I had moved on, and reopening that door, even for the satisfaction of hearing him grovel, held no appeal. The best closure, I had learned, was the kind you gave yourself, not the kind you waited for someone else to provide. My 50th birthday was a different kind of celebration altogether. This time, I did throw a party, a grand affair at my favorite hotel in Manhattan, with all the people who had stood by me through the worst and celebrated with me through the best. Rebecca gave a toast that made me cry, talking about strength and resilience and the power of women who refuse to be victims. Sarah talked about getting her sister back, about the joy of seeing me become myself again. Janet announced that our company had just been valued at over $2 billion, an achievement that would have seemed impossible when I was starting out in my 20s with nothing but ambition and a business plan. As I looked around the room at all these faces, all these people who genuinely cared about me, I felt rich in ways that had nothing to do with money. The truth about surviving betrayal, I had learned, was that it changed you in fundamental ways. You could never go back to the person you were before, never regain that innocent trust, that naive belief that love conquered all. But what you could do was build something new from the wreckage. Something perhaps not as pretty or perfect as what you had before, but stronger, more resilient, more authentically yours. I had built a life that was entirely my own, shaped by my choices, protected by my vigilance, enriched by my experiences. It wasn't the life I had planned when I stood at that altar in Napa Valley all those years ago, but it was a good life, a meaningful life, a life worth protecting. Sometimes young women would ask me if I regretted marrying David, if I wished I could go back and warn my younger self to run in the opposite direction when he approached me at that charity gala. The answer was always no. Not because the marriage had been worth the pain, but because without it, I wouldn't have become who I was now. I wouldn't have learned my own strength, wouldn't have discovered the depths of my resilience, wouldn't have forged the connections that now sustained me. The price had been high, terribly high, but the education had been priceless. I had learned that I could survive anything, that I could protect myself, that I could build and rebuild as many times as necessary. These were lessons that no business school could teach, that no amount of success could provide. They had to be earned through experience, and I had earned them. As I moved into this new decade of my life, I found myself thinking less about the past and more about the future. There was still so much I wanted to do, so many places I wanted to see, so many goals I wanted to achieve. The company was planning an IPO, a move that would cement our place among the major players in our industry. I was considering writing a book, not about the divorce, but about building a business from scratch, about the challenges and rewards of being a female entrepreneur in a male-dominated world. I had been invited to speak at conferences around the world, to share my expertise and inspire the next generation of business leaders. My life was full and rich and purposeful, and I woke up every morning grateful for all of it, even the painful parts that had led me to this place. The last thing I'll share is perhaps the most important lesson I learned from this entire experience. I learned that your worth is not determined by who loves you or who betrays you. It's not measured in dollars, though financial independence is crucial for protecting yourself. Your worth comes from your character, your integrity, your ability to face adversity and refuse to let it break you. It comes from the lives you touch, the people you help, the positive changes you make in the world. David tried to reduce me to a bank account, tried to make me believe that my value was in what I could provide for him financially. But I was so much more than that, had always been so much more than that. I was a survivor, a fighter, a builder of dreams, and protector of what mattered. He had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, he had given me the greatest gift of all, the knowledge of my own unbreakable strength. So if you're listening to this and you're going through something similar, if you've discovered that the person you trust most is planning your destruction, know this: you are stronger than you think. You can survive this betrayal and emerge better for it. Protect yourself, surround yourself with good people, and never apologize for defending what you've worked for. Trust is beautiful, but it should never come at the cost of your security and self-respect. Build your life on a foundation that no one else can shake. And if someone tries to tear you down, let them watch as you rise higher than ever before, because that's what we do. We rise, we rebuild, we reclaim our power, and we never, ever let anyone make us believe we're worth less than everything.